Hello, everybody. Welcome to Women's Radio Hour today, and I'm excited. We have two special guests today, and we're going to talk about global warming and the financial situation and what we as consumers can do and why it's so important for us to be aware of this problem. So I'm going to let my first guest introduce themselves, and then we'll take it to the second guest. All right, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. My name is Daria Flores, and after I semi-retired from my jobs, I decided that the most important thing I could do with my time is work on climate change. So over the years, I've been doing that, and the latest thing I was involved with was the Third Act Day of Action, which was on the 21st of this month. And we'll be going into that a little more as we proceed with this program.
Thank you. And our other guest?
My name is Janet O'Day, and thank you also for having us both here. I appreciate the chance to always speak with Daria, so that's good. I'm retired in 2021 also, and after an illustrious career and also a lot of time doing volunteer work with Save Our Heritage organization and forming a group called Mission Hills Heritage in my local community, writing a book about our community. One thing I was passionate about was adaptive reuse in building, and that's because of what the building industry does when it tears something down and wastes all the energy and effort and beautiful materials in some old buildings for no good reason, but to put something else new there and use all those materials over again. So as a result, I inched my way into climate change. And as the election happened in 2016, I felt democracy needed help too. Third Act was formed in 2021, and I joined Third Act, and that's how I met Daria.
Thank you, Janet. I started in the environmental world in the 1970s. I heard about global warming back then, got into the recycling, got into living green as I can, and I've been involved in it ever since. You can tell how much I've changed everything, but we all have a little part to play. So even if it's just a little bit, I was reading about a man today who was an ice climber, and he noticed that everywhere he went, there wasn't ice. And now he's decided to start fighting climate change because he realizes there won't be any ice for him to climb. And it's really important for us to protect what's left. And then I'm going to add to what you said about the houses. The best greenhouse is taking an old house and repairing it and upgrading it to green energy usage. And so that's one of the greenest thing you can do is take an older house and refurbish it.
Yes.
So let's talk about Act 3, or as it's called, right? Or am I into the theater world and lost?
Janet, do you want to start
Sure.
off?
It's actually called Third Act, and it
Yes.
is made up of older folks or over 60. So, not really older folks, but anyone over age 60 can get involved. And the idea is really to lend a hand to the youth that have been so great of late in their organizational efforts of really making a point that they're going to be living with the earth that we leave behind. So Third Act really wants to really be in a position to offer assistance to that same cause and to really reach a hand to other organizations that are filled with young people. And they can't always go to a meeting because they have school, for example.
And we do need the bodies on the street. We do need the emails. We do need the petitions signed. And the more people that can do that, the more it looks like there is a movement there. And I agree with you. The young people, they're going to inherit what we leave. And I cringe at the thought when I look at how many species of animals are dying, how many plant areas, how many areas are becoming desert. There's going to be wars over water because we only 3% of the water on the planet we can actually drink. And yet we're using it for fracking, we're using it for plastics, we're using it for all of these productions, and then you can never drink it afterwards. So we've got to learn a greener lifestyle. Did you want to add something, Daria?
Well, I thought it was interesting that I think Janet and I both kind of signed up for Third Act when it first started, and it's just a little over a year old now. But when it first started, it was all about people over 60 and doing this uh, day of action and so forth. And then after it got a little into the day of action, it was like, but we really want to have young people working on this too. And so the over 60 kind of stepped a little bit to the background because we really wanted to have as many people as possible involved, and particularly younger people bringing their energy.
Yes, and young people do have energy and do have new ideas and do have different ways of doing things, which can, I've noticed that I've been in the peace movement many, many years, and you don't get a lot of young people in the peace movement. And it's so exciting when you finally do get some young people who
Mhm.
join.
And it's also good to have young people because they are good at social media. And I, for one, am not good at social media. And it's really hard when you're dealing with a group of people over 60 to do things in social media. So we kept asking our younger people if they could help out with that.
Well, let's talk about banking and what banking does to the planet, because we know that banks want to make profits. And one of the most profitable thing on the planet is oil production, because you make profits all the way along from the extraction, the export, and production, and all the way down to the consumer. Everywhere along the line, you make a profit. So it's very profitable. Even Sierra Club used to fund oil, have oil stock, and they finally defunded that. And a lot of universities have oil stock. So it's really important that we realize that the banks should not be doing that at this point in time.
Well, it was interesting because so part of our day of action was telling the four biggest funders of new oil and gas projects that they need to stop or we're going to move our business elsewhere. And so, since most of my business just turned out to be with Chase, other than my other banking account, which I actually use the most, but I have a banking account and a credit card with Chase and a safety deposit box. So I went in to change all of these out. And then I went to my new bank and I opened up an account and I explained to them what was happening. And I said, you may have other people coming in because it's a big thing that's going to happen. And he said, well, that's really interesting. I don't understand why the banks aren't jumping on renewable energy because that is really the future and that's where their profits are going to come from in the future.
Okay, Janet, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it's a terrible investment. I mean, it's very short-lived, even if we're trying to meet goals and everyone says they are, which I can't imagine we can make them if we're continuing to invest in new fossil fuel projects. So by all means, as far as trying to look just even as a paper investment, this is a very short-term, short-lived thing. Do you want to be the first guy off the boat in a lifeboat? Or do you want to be the last guy off the boat and not be sure that you're going to have a seat on the lifeboat? So if the banks were smart, they would just get out now, in
And
my
the, I,
opinion.
the other thing about oil, it's not renewable. Once you exhaust all those, and that's what we're doing with that dirty oil we're bringing down from Canada, the shale oil, which is the dirtiest form of oil and the least productive form of oil. Once you exhaust the resources, you have nothing. But these people, these Chevron and Exxon and Shell, want to exhaust every last bit of oil from the planet before they give up the ghost, because they were supposed to be, read they were supposed to be funding green projects, and silently they've defunded all of those projects.
Yeah, there's a lot of greenwashing going on with the banks.
Yes, and would you name the other three big banks besides Chase?
Certainly, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. And when we did our rally, we did it at Chase and Citibank. And it was pretty interesting because when I went in and explained to the bank why we were there, they knew. I said, do you have any questions? And they said, no, we already know what you're doing and that you are going to be here. And so corporate was very interested in what we were doing and staying on top of it, which I thought was interesting.
Well, it'd be nice if just by doing this, we could even transform how the bank does business.
Yeah, well, I don't think it'll be quite that easy, but my motivation for being in the third act, banking on our future, was something that came out from the International Energy Agency last year. And they said if we wanted to meet the Paris climate targets, there can be no new investments in oil, gas, and coal from now on, from this year. But
Yes.
Mr. Begg still continue to fund new oil and gas projects. And these are long-term projects because it will be years before they actually are making a profit from it. So they're really saying, no, we aren't looking to renewable energy for our future. We're still hanging on to oil and gas.
And we are. There are so many people when I read online people's comments when I post something about let's not use oil. It's people act like there's no other way to live. They have little imagination that we could actually live in a different fashion. And when you think that automobiles were first invented, they had an electric car and a gas car, but the gas car won out because the gas companies pushed the gas car, and the electric car that was made at the time of the Model T faded out. Now, if we would have gone a different direction, do you think we'd be in a better place now? Probably.
Well, if we did a different direction, we probably would have adopted the principles that the American indigenous people lived instead of trying to have them turn into capitalists. But that's a whole other thing. Since we aren't there and we have what we have now, it is incumbent upon us to attempt to make this shift. And it's not easy. We are, as a culture, California has a car culture, and we are addicted to our oils. And I try to give up plastic, and it's almost impossible. I try so hard to stop and reduce my plastic use. And everything that you buy comes in a plastic container, or there's plastic around the plastic, which drives me crazy. So we don't have that. And I wish we would have, but since we don't, it's up to us. What can we do now? And your program and things like your program and our rally or our march was really an effort to try to bring this issue to light, because there's nothing more important that we can do.
And one thing we can do about plastics, and I'm glad our state has decided to start getting rid of the styrofoam, which never decomposes, and making people go to the cardboard, take out foods, and the biodegradable spoons and knives. But if the more we can pursue that in our everyday life, I mean, there's a certain amount of plastic. I try to bring my own bags when I go shopping or take it home in a cardboard box, which I later recycle. I mean, there's little things you can do every day to lessen your use of plastic. And we can also sign petitions and send those petitions to the stores. Please don't individually wrap in plastic X, Y, and Z. And hopefully, I know they have excuses about items being stolen, and so they do these plastic shells that are impossible to open, even if you bought the item. But the more we rebel against it and fight against it, the better off we'll be.
The
Yes,
problem
Daria.
is there's a real sense of urgency. Like we don't have a lot of time. And I feel in our culture, and probably not limited to our culture, people don't really grasp something that's in the distant future. And yet this is something we have to grasp, and we have to grasp it right away. And I see that with my own family. They know what I'm into. They know all this information, but they're busy, taking care of their kids, getting them in the right schools and all of that. And they don't think about what is my child's world going to look like. And it's shocking to me, but it's our culture.
And I see that with so many people just having babies. They don't realize, what's this child going to have when they're the parents' age? What kind of world will we have if it's hot and there's no water and it's hard to raise food? I mean, they should be helping. I know we're not supposed to should people, but they should be helping mitigate the problem in the future today. I think Janet wanted to say something first.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in that it really takes leadership. And that's one of the reasons why we thought these big banks right now, especially at a time like right now, when the banking industry is really in the headlines a lot for a whole lot of other reasons, with the decline of the Silicon Valley Bank that just went under, who came to the rescue? But
We did.
Chase Bank came to the rescue, and other of these other big banks are relied upon as too big to fail. That means they have a real responsibility. It's not just the corporate CEOs and the corporate board members that decide to make these investments. They need to show the leadership. We rely on them for our day-to-day banking needs and are unconscious necessarily of all the investments they make, but they know what they're doing, and their responsibility, it needs to be at a higher level. Ours needs to be high too, but when you have responsibility for millions of trillions of investment dollars from your depositors and people that get your loans and your school loans, et cetera, your responsibility level is very high, and that's why we're demanding them to respond.
And Daria, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to my family's reaction to climate change because there is an exception, and that is my grandson when he was about 6 or 7. He was visiting and he came up to me in the morning while I was having my coffee and he said, "You know, Grandma," he said, "you're lucky because you aren't going to live very long. But
Oh.
I am going to be here when climate change happens." And he was so young, and they must have studied this in school because that didn't last. But that was a moment in time, and I was sort of speechless. And then the only thing I could say to him was, there are a lot of people that are working very hard to change this. And that was as comforting as I could be, which was pretty sad.
And I think as a community, we are in a sense of denial about climate change because denial is much more comfortable for most people than actually looking at the facts and actually looking that we actually have to make some big changes. And so it's easier to say, oh, it doesn't exist. The scientists are crazy. I don't have anything to worry about.
Well, we've been lied to for a long time too, from the same industry that wants to profit from, the fact that there's a war in Ukraine that's going on right now. So they're able to profit a little bit extra from that and take advantage of that. But then they lied to us for 30 years and they've had great science and then they buried it. And so that's just that's disconcerting. I mean, that needs to be held up there and a light shined upon that because they have a culpability to us, and to continue on and to bury it is not the right answer. We're never going to get anywhere then.
Nor should they be allowed to continue to profit from the exploitation of the raw materials that is causing such a disaster. There's a group of young people up in Montana who are suing the oil companies for the damage to the environment. And this is what it comes to. The young people are really stepping up to the plate, and I'm so proud of them. But we also have to have their backs. And that's what's really important because it's the more people we can get working in the right direction, the greater chance we have of making changes. If it's just like one little voice in the wilderness, you're not going to get much done. So the more you can get people speaking the same language in unison, the more chance we have to really change the direction. It's a big ship. It's going to take a while to change. Yes, Daria.
Yes, and to that point, so we aren't all dismayed about this, there have been some recent global progresses in defunding. In December, the biggest bank in Europe announced it wouldn't lend to fossil fuel expansion. And then this year, the biggest bank in Denmark went even further. And the biggest pension fund in Europe put all the world's banks on notice that they have to move. And so did the comptroller of the city of New York, who has $250 billion to back up his words. So there is movement. We just have to make sure it continues and that it goes faster.
Yes. And let everybody know this is Women's Radio Hour at 89.1 FM on your dial, KNSJ, your social justice network here in San Diego. This is Patricia Law. I'm talking to Janet and Daria today from Third Act. And we're talking about divesting. I remember going into my bank, well, maybe 15 years ago, and they wanted me to get into stocks and bonds. And I said, but I don't want to invest in oil companies. I don't want to invest in big corporations that pollute. And they said, but you'll make money. And I said, I don't care. I am not going to invest in these. And they stopped asking after a while because I was just adamant I was not going to follow suit, that it wasn't that important to me to do that, because I really feel like if we don't follow what we say, then we can't make changes.
One of the things that was so cathartic during our rally in March was people cutting up their credit cards, and they all had something really good to say. One lady pulled her credit card out and she goes, "This card's called the Freedom Card," and she clipped it, and it really did feel good, because by that point, people had already switched to either a credit union or a community bank or someplace, a beneficial bank, where they knew that their funds weren't being used for investing in oil. And that was a good feeling. And it does take time. And I know that Daria, for example, went through a process where she explained how it took a while to get all the pieces together to make that move. But it really is, I think I'd love to hear what Daria has to say about how that feels now that she's completed the process.
Oh, I'm glad it's over. And I also have to say that I found it tedious, and I have really simplified my life. So for other people, they have home loans, etc., and it's much, much more complicated. But I'm glad that it's over, and hopefully it will all work out. I even found in the process, actually, that there was this money market account, and it was the money market account, this was with Fidelity, had certain banks that I guess were providing the interest for that account. And one of them was Chase. I just found that out by accident, and then I was able to transfer that out. So, they're like fingers and everything with these banks.
Yeah, I think they get into as many different sections of the money market, saying all the banks and the security loans and credit cards and stuff, because when you were out with the pandemic, the Bank of America took over banking for California. With your pandemic funds. And normally I wouldn't have nothing to do with Bank of America, but here it was the only way to get your funds. So you kind of get caught up in it.
I wanted to also mention that with the cutting up of the cards at our event, the youth did a petition, and maybe Janet can talk a little more about that, because I think that was unique to our group in San Diego.
Yeah, well, we had other organizations besides Third Act participating in our march and our rally, including ACT, which is a group that Daria's in, the Interfaith Coalition for Earth Justice, the Sierra Club, Surfrider, and 350.org and 350.org Youth, for example. There was also Hammond Climate Solutions, the Climate Action Campaign, but the 350.org Youth came up with a youth petition.
Actually, it's San Diego 350.
Thank you.
350.org is the national, San Diego 350 is the local, which I'm also a member of. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And so the youth organization of San Diego 350.org came up with a petition. And basically the petition talks about not investing in these banks, and they have a big future ahead of them. They're going to be needing college funds and home loans and auto loans and 401ks or savings for their retirement for their whole lives. And so the real power of that petition lies in the future earnings, that if these companies don't get their act together, this group of youth is going to make a concerted effort to avoid them. We wouldn't mind giving these banks our business, but we don't want to invest in the things that they're doing. So until they change their ways, they're not going to be part of the entire life of the financial independence of these youth.
And boycotting is one of the fastest and best ways of changing businesses' behavior. It was used a lot in the civil rights movement when they boycotted all of the soda shops that wouldn't integrate. So, and they also did a boycott of all the stores downtown, and still they stopped having a black entrance and a white entrance. And it took 6 to 9 months, but it changed things, and it didn't go back to the way it was afterwards, because they knew they couldn't count on those customers coming back after that. And so by boycotting businesses that we don't believe in what they're doing, we can actually make changes in their behavior.
That's like the ESG thing that everyone talks about. It stands for environmental, social, and governance. And a lot of different boards are trying to attract board members that have diversity or that have some social elements to actually bring to the party, or environmentalism. So there's a little bit of a backlash against that now, you see, in some conversations, because they're greenwashing that too, where these corporations are saying we're going to do this, but then the reality is on the back door, something else is going on. So, but they're talking about it now, and it's become important for the corporate world to have these ESG types of actions going on, because that's what people really want. So the fact that they're greenwashing it, they know that people want it. So holding their feet to the fire again and putting leaders into leadership positions is really important.
Yes, and I did think we should also explain to our audience what 350 means. Why is that number significant?
Well, Bill McKibben, the same person that started Third Act, started 350. And he talked to scientists that worked with global warming, and he said, at what degree centigrade, no, I'm sorry.
Parts per million.
Parts per million, thank you. What amount of parts per million of carbon can we have in the atmosphere and still have a livable climate? Not a livable like we are, not livable so it's pleasant and livable. And the answer was 350 parts per million. Well, we're substantially over 400 now.
425 is,
Thank
I think,
you.
the last amount I heard. Yeah.
So, so our name is sort of obsolete at this point, but we kept it.
And well, because it's significant.
Yeah.
Because that would have been optimal to maintain that amount. I remember when the zoo put in the hockey stick. You know what the hockey stick is? It shows the carbon rising, and it goes straight up, 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 up. And it shows how many parts per in the air of carbon. And people actually got rid of their zoo passes because they didn't want to talk about global warming. And they threatened the zoo for even talking about it, which is frightening, because this is really important. It's the air we all breathe. This is the earth we live on. And if we don't all take care of it, we're going to lose it. And you cannot just have a temper tantrum and go, I don't believe in this and I don't want to believe in this, so it's not going to happen. You can't do that with global warming. You can't do that with climate change.
But it's happening. People are doing that. And I got a call couple of years ago, I got a call from my brother and he said, let's talk about climate change. And we're politically very different. And I said, no, it's probably better we don't talk about climate change. He said, no, I really want to know, do you think there's climate change? And I said, I'm not going to go into this with you. Just go online. There is so much information about it. But I said, just be careful, because the same companies that were doing disinformation on smoking are doing disinformation on climate change. So look out for that. And then he called me back a while later and he said, yeah, I looked it up and this is what it said, and there's not really any climate change. And I said, oh, what was your source? And he told me his source. And while we were talking, I looked it up online and it was that company.
Yeah.
So, and that's what he wanted to find. I'm sure he saw other things too. And I think, because for a number of reasons, people don't want to deal with climate change. And so they're looking for reasons not to believe in it. Some of the reasons I think are just that they feel impotent, that they really can't do anything
It
about.
makes you feel hopeless and helpless, like you have no control over what's going on because we are set in our ways. And for myself, it really angers me when I hear people blaming the Indians and the Chinese for global warming. They have the largest population on the planet, but you have people that live on the street with their clothes they have on, living out of a bottle of jug, and you have people who are living in pretty extreme poverty in a lot of those countries with very minimal waste of what they have. And yet we're blaming them for it because we don't want to do anything about our lifestyles.
And don't forget that a lot of that carbon is coming because they're making products for us that we're buying.
Yes.
I don't think I ever have seen anything that works that into the equation.
No, and I think that's an important point. What did you want to say, Janet?
Oh, I just meant that's the same with the oil and gas industry too. If we actually paid for the amount of waste of byproducts that comes out of the tailpipe, besides all the other ways along the line, as you were talking about for the supply chain, for the extraction methods, et cetera, if we actually really paid for all that, but instead oil and gas companies, they're choosing to let the earth take care of all that as if the earth really can. And the suit that you talked about earlier for the Montana area, that's probably some sort of a way to hold them accountable for recovery of those costs. But those are real tangible costs to our environment and our earth. And they are not being paid for now in an adequate way. And really, it would be very interesting to see what the calculation is. And I bet someone has that probably in the oil and gas industry.
And the other thing I want to add about gasoline is people think, well, it's so easy because it comes out of the pump and you put it into your car. So they don't think about the extraction. They don't think about the refinement. They don't think about the transportation. They don't think about the storage. And what they don't realize is they put a lot of chemicals in the gasoline. You have benzene, which is cancerous. You have formaldehyde. You have all sorts of cancerous chemicals that are being used to help the fuel burn better. It's coming out of the tailpipe into our air and polluting our air. I feel like sometimes when people go, well, cars are just as clean when they run on gasoline as electric cars, I feel like saying, well, lock yourself in a garage and close all the windows, turn your car on, your gas car, and see how long you last. Because you can do that with an electric car and you could be in there all night. But with a gas car, you wouldn't last very long.
You're tough, Patricia.
Well, I guess over the years, I've lost a little patience with some people. But it's the truth, right? They don't realize how toxic cars are.
And on that happy note, one thing that we noticed during our event is it was pouring cats and dogs right before the event started. And I actually didn't attend the event because I had jury duty. So I ran out there in the middle of my jury duty with my umbrella, and I didn't need it because the rain had already stopped. But people were joyous about being out there and contributing, because when you contribute something, you feel good about yourself. You feel good about what you're doing. It's a chance to grow as a person. You're putting yourself out there a little bit. And people in this weird weather pattern we had all their rain gear on. You could perhaps hardly recognize some people. And the mood, though, was very joyous. And I'm convinced it's because they were really contributing beyond their own self to something that really mattered to them and really mattered to maybe their grandkids or maybe their neighbors' kids. But that was something that was a complete surprise to me. And I just ran out there on my break, but I could feel it. It was great.
Yes. And I went to a second protest that week. I did that one, and then I went to one about the gas and electric company. They've signed a contract where they don't have to produce clean energy till 2040 in San Diego, which is going the wrong direction. And yeah, and then allowing them to raise the prices of their electricity at the same time they're using polluting sources. So we really have to stay on top of all of these things because we all use electricity. I could not exist without electricity anymore, and I don't know anybody else I know that could. So, but we need it to be produced the correct way so that it's non-polluting. I personally have had solar panels on my house for 20, I'm on my 23rd year now. So I'm used to being green that way. But I highly suggest people get solar panels. Whether you make money on it or not, that's not important. The more people that do it, the better off we all are. Yes, Daria.
But I think so. I'm around a lot because I'm in the climate business, activist business. I'm around a lot of people like you, Pat, that have their solar panels and their electric cars and so forth. But we have to keep in mind climate justice. And there are a lot of people that can't afford all of that. And it's important that they're included in what we're doing. And yeah.
And I was reading about how in South Bay they bought a Nissan Leaf and they can charge it for free. People can use it for free. So it's become a community car, and people can utilize that car within the community and drive an electric car. So there's things like that we can do. Yes, Janet.
I was involved, I had a business and my business, I was the owner of the business and I became involved with a women's group that sponsored installation of solar panels on someone's house. And it was a minority situation. And we were basically funding it and installing it. And it was through a group called Grid Alternatives. And that group is very focused on helping minority and I think the social justice part of climate change to really help bring more into the fold. Because just like this person's home, there's also a lot of multi-unit buildings that could really take advantage of it, but they don't really even sit down and do the math where maybe it's an apartment owner or maybe it's a condo owner where they don't really just do the math and figure out that there is some costs to it, but over time they could work something out and get the leverage. So groups like Grid Alternatives, if anyone is out there listening and they want to look that up, they might want to consider donating to that group or having a speech from that group for your community, because I think that those types of groups are so important to Daria's point about the
Thank
justice.
you. I hadn't even heard about that group. And so, one thing I wanted to add to that, I was reading about a city that had decided to make all of its transportation free. So you could ride the buses, the trains, the subways, and it didn't cost anything. It was tax subsidized in an effort to make the city greener. And the poor people were really benefiting from it. The city was benefiting from it. There were a few grumbly car members that were saying, well, we're subsidizing it. And there was supposed to be a rise in crime. I think it was in Philadelphia. It was supposed to be a rise in crime, but that never manifested. And I think that's something Southern California could really benefit from. Yes, Daria.
Yes, and we have such a bad public transportation system here. And I have been to meetings where the city, the county wanted to get feedback from the community. And people from low-income areas were talking about they didn't have buses close to them, that they needed to take their kids to school, they needed to get groceries. And can you please help us? And they were totally ignored. So, frankly, I think if public transportation were free, most people wouldn't even take it here because it's not good. It takes too long. It's just not efficient.
Well,
So we
when I,
really have to work on our public transportation system. So
yes, there was a study they did, and when men run public transportation, they think about it going to work and back, and that's it. When women run public transportation, they think about going from doctor's office to schools to shops. So it's a more circular route. Whereas when men plan it, it's going to work and back. And that's what we need in this city, is the more circular route. I lived in Encanto and it took me 3 hours to get to work, 3 hours to get back, and I worked for 3 hours. So it was a 9 hour day just to do 3 hours work. And I gave up on the bus because I was determined to ride the bus. But there is a certain point where it just doesn't make any sense.
well, hopefully with the county revamping the whole transportation system, that will change.
Yes, because I lived in
I do
Europe where
say
everybody
hopefully.
uses mass transit and it's wonderful.
It has to be financed, however, and it has to go through. I had another thing I used to say, that anybody that was working on mass transit in San Diego as as a requirement for their work should have to take mass transit to go to work, because I think people that don't, myself included, are fairly clueless to what the real problem is.
Amen.
Yes. Yes, and I'm going to let everybody know this is Women's Radio out 89.1 FM on your dial, KNSJ. I have Janet and Daria, and we're talking about divesting from fuels, the gas companies, and making sure our money goes towards green energy and changing the way banks work and changing the way our community works. And I've been reading a lot of letters. We've been building bike paths. San Diego is perfect for bike paths. I lived in Germany for almost 2 years, and there were bike paths everywhere. So I never drove a car once. I biked everywhere I went. And it was so wonderful to be able to just jump on your bike and pedal wherever you wanted to go. You were protected from the cars for the most part. Sometimes it was through the forest, sometimes it was a separate part on the sidewalk for you. We need that in San Diego. We have the weather for it. We have the ability to use bicycles here, and yet everybody fights it because the car people feel like we paid for the roads. Why the heck should we let bicyclists on it?
Well, and the bike paths have to be safe also. And I
Yes.
have a bicycle, and I got it originally for transportation, but safety has always been an issue with me.
Yeah.
Yes, and
And sometimes it, it sounds good on paper, but if they don't really have the infrastructure, they don't set it up in advance for the infrastructure, and trying to shoehorn something in. I know that there's some actions going on in downtown where they've taken a lane off of the road and they've changed the parking structure and they've added these big, huge curves to try to put a bike lane there. And Daria, I don't think I would take that to ride my bike. I'd be afraid I'd hit one of those curbs and go flying over my handlebars. It doesn't look safe. It isn't planned out right. And really, I agree with you, Patricia. In Europe, they've done just a much better job. I did a bike trip through Europe and went from country to country
isn't
on
it
my bike,
delightful?
and
Yeah.
it was delightful, and it was set up so nice. But it really does take planning, and that means buying a strip of land along a road, and or saying this is a pedestrian street and it might be adjacent to the street that's busier, but make that a pedestrian street. There's certainly ways to do it, but it takes a lot of planning And it could be done.
And we do need to get out of our cars more.
It could be done.
The city also needs to be much more pedestrian friendly. If you try to cross El Cajon Boulevard in North Park area, there's a lot of places you can't even cross the street. They won't even let you. No pedestrians allowed across. So you have to walk blocks out of your way to get across this big road, and then the lights aren't long enough for you to actually get across 6 lanes. So we need to, when we build the city, make it much more human ability so
You
that
know
we
what?
can, yes.
You might have already done this, but it would be an interesting subject for one of your programs to have somebody either from the county or from San Diego 350 Transportation Committee talk about what the plans are in the future for mass transit, which includes bicycles.
We have done a couple of shows, one on bicycles and bicycle usage and one on mass transit, but these things are always changing and updating. And so it's really important to keep abreast of what's going on, because plans, what we said 3 years ago, may not be as pertinent today as it was 3 years ago. So who knows? But we do have to stay on top of that, because I loved it in Germany, seeing the little housewives with their bicycles going to the shops and coming back with their bread in the back basket or in the front basket. And they would go every day to shop. And it's so much healthier than getting in your, I have people in my neighborhood I'm 6 blocks away from a grocery store, and they drive to it and then drive back. And I'm like, See, we need to realize that when you don't use your bodies, you lose your bodies. And I know there are some people who cannot balance on a bicycle, but there are three-wheelers and
And
four-wheelers for that much.
the work from home shift that had been thrust upon us through the pandemic, perhaps, or the fact that we're doing Zoom calls now is like such a normal part of our everyday. To be in a area where maybe there's a little shop around the corner you could frequent more often, so it's walkable, so you don't necessarily have to get on a bike. I know I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of accessible services, so I don't really drive my car or have to drive my car almost anywhere. I used to walk to work every day. I mean, really, I walked all over the place, and I still tend to do errands, and I'll take a walk and incorporate in the part of my day. So I know that when you're hustling and bustling, you have 3 kids at home and a dog, and you're trying to have a chance to have dinner as a family, that time is a big factor. But if there's a way, with the work from home folks that are maybe now incorporating that into their lives more, maybe we have some more options with our transportation, and to try to take walking, don't take that for granted.
Did the ibis market make it through the pandemic okay?
It's still here, yeah.
Because they have the wonderful Middle Eastern foods at that market.
Delicious.
Oh,
Yeah.
Delicious.
And yeah, Daria.
gee, now I forgot what I was going to say. Get back to me. Get back to me. Oh,
Okay.
I know. So Janet is on Third Act Southern California Committee, and they have. So I was just a member of Third Act, and I participated in the planning for our day of action on the 21st. Janet, I think, can tell us a little more about what's on the stovetop for next things.
Sure. Well, our group actually formed in February as a Southern California division of Third Act. Third Act is a national level group. And what our Southern California group is just bringing some regional focus to it. And we might also do stuff statewide. So there's 3 groups in California. One's a local Third Act in San Francisco, one's in Sacramento, and then there's our Southern California regional group. And so hopefully what we'll do is we'll work together with California groups on issues that are related to our state. One of them concerning divestiture is with CalSTRS, which is the California Pension Plan for teachers, and trying to get them to divest. There's a bill that was introduced, I believe it was last session, and they're trying to, it had gotten further along than it ever had. something of that nature. So we will probably be working with those other groups within Southern California, San Francisco and Sacramento to help move that legislation forward. And that's really topical to our divesting conversation now. But then Third Act itself is also going to start forming working groups. So people, once they join Third Act, they'll probably get a questionnaire very shortly and be asked, do you want to focus on democracy, or do you want to focus on climate change, and come up with actions to establish those groups. So we're in that forming stage now, and our next group meeting will be in April and coming up towards the end of the month. And a lot of decisions will be made at those meetings as to how we want to form, and people will really get a voice in how to do that.
And isn't there something going on? I have in my notes here that shareholders days in May. Do you know anything about that,
I
Janet?
actually don't know anything about
Okay,
that.
well, that's all I know about it. Patricia, do you know about that?
No, but I'm going to suggest there's going to be an Earth Day in Balboa Park,
Yeah.
and that may be a day for you to plan to be out there and talking to people about what you are doing with this third act and how important it is. Because Earth Day is like my Christmas. It's like celebrating the earth and celebrating the environment. It's really important to me. And it's a good time to actually meet with the everyday public who does show up and may not know anything about any of this stuff. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not going to bully you into going, but
I do
it's,
think that San Diego 350 is going to be participating in a number of Earth Day events. It seems like there's more than one. I know
yes.
in the past they always did the Balboa Park one, but now they have a list of about 5 that they're participating in.
That's good. That means it's expanding. Well, we're down to about our last 6 minutes. So is there anything that we haven't said that you think we should say? Do you want to give out any website information to your group, or do you want to reiterate anything that we've talked about that you may feel is very important? Yes, Janet.
Well, I know that a lot of people that are involved in Third Act are not interested in social media particularly, but Third Act has social media. So if you're interested in what's going on with the Southern California group as we develop, as we make plans, or even just to see the antics and the street theater and the card cutting that we did at our Day of Action, which was March 21st, most recently, please visit Third Act on Facebook, which is Third Act SoCal, SoCal. And that's on Facebook and on Twitter. And then also Instagram is the same, Third Act SoCal with a hyphen underneath the L, after the L. And so there's some posts that are there. And we hope to put upcoming events. So things that you're talking about for any actions we do at Balboa Park for Earth Day, or for any other collaboration that we can manage to muster with 350.org, we'll want to do that, and those will be posted on there.
And I have to say, if you sign up for Third Act, like I did last year, I didn't have any particular thing in mind. I basically signed up and wanted to see what they were up to and what fit my interests and my skills and my time. So I think it's a good idea. I'm going to sign up, and I'm interested to see what's going to be happening with the SoCal group for San Diego.
And it's also exciting to be into an organization that's just founding, just starting up, because you can help direct it, the direction it's going in, because you're right there on the ground floor with the whole thing. And so I do think we should say which banks we should divest from again, because I think it's really important in case people missed the first part of the show or forgot. Let's talk about those banks again, because I think we need to remember who they are.
Okay, so the biggest financer of new oil and gas is Chase, but the second biggest is Citibank. And the 4, which are those 2 banks plus Wells Fargo and Chase, are the largest in the world, right, Janet?
Bank of America too.
I'm sorry, and Bank of America.
Yes.
Yes. So we are saying no funding any new oil and gas projects, or we take our business elsewhere. And that's it.
Yes,
Well,
Janet.
I'm also aware of Third Act has some resources on its main page. So thirdact.org has all sorts of resources. So if you're trying to figure out how do I change my loan from Wells Fargo to a different bank, they have some videotaped from experts. Daria and I, neither of us, I don't believe, are banking experts, but they have enlisted some people that are very knowledgeable, and they have different topics. So maybe it's just you want to move your credit card and it's talking about how to do that, but it might be a little bit more complicated. One of the resources that got me so excited after going through one of those trainings was a website called investyourvalues.org. Literally all just spelled together with no spaces. And through that, I could look at what's in my portfolio of my investments, or you could look at, if you work for a big company, you could see what their grade level was. And it looks for all sorts of things, investing in fossil fuels, but also deforestation. Or does it invest in prisons? Things like that. And I thought that was amazing. But besides that one little nugget of a website, I had a page of different resources from my notes from looking at those videos. So anyone that's really looking for some guidance as to how to divest, that is a great place to go.
I also look for workers' rights being respected and benefits for the employees and whether they're being ecologically sound in their business practices as a store. Do they throw away a bunch of things or do they recycle and things like that? And those are important things to look at and think about. So we're going to wrap up here. Janet, Daria, did you want to say something else?
I just wanted to say, so I was the liaison with my ACT group to Third Act and what they were doing. And when I talked to them about taking their business elsewhere, we talked about it. And I said, you have to do what's comfortable for you and what works for you. And I think for a lot of people, it's great to have those resources and they're really into it. But for a lot of other people, it's like, just make it easy. I'll support you. I'll move my business. Just make it easy. So that's the first step. And you can do the easy way to move it. And then you can look into all these other things at your leisure and change again.
Thank you. You've been listening to Women's Radio Hour. Today we had Janet and Daria, and we're talking about divesting in banks that support oil and oil industries and finding a greener way to help our planet survive the global climate change.